Hello students, today my next video on transportation of gases. So gases mainly transported by, gases means respiratory gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are called respiratory gases. So during inhalation, air is enters into the inside. After inhalation, oxygen is diffused into the blood. Next, at the same time, carbon dioxide released into the air. So here this oxygen and carbon dioxide, how they are after diffused into the blood during exchange process. During exchange process, what will happen? Oxygen diffuse into the blood. So through the blood, how the oxygen and carbon dioxide they are transported to tissue. We will see this transportation. First of all, we will discuss about transport of oxygen. So oxygen mainly transported by two ways. It is transported by two ways. They are, first one, as dissolved state. Dissolved state. So here oxygen, only 3% of oxygen, very less amount of oxygen can transported by this way. Dissolved state, this oxygen directly dissolved in the plasma. The liquid portion of the blood is called plasma. So in the plasma, only 3%, very less amount of oxygen is dissolved in the blood, because here oxygen has less solubility compared to the carbon dioxide. So that's why oxygen, very less amount of oxygen is dissolved in the blood. So only 3% of oxygen can transport to the tissues. Next, second one is through the RBC. Through the RBC. So major amount of oxygen, nearly 90%, 97% of oxygen can transport, 97% of transport through the RBC. So RBC, red blood cells. So RBC play important role in the transportation of oxygen. So in the RBC, what is present in the RBC? Hemoglobin. A respiratory pigment is present. Hemoglobin is also called a respiratory pigment. So which helps in the transportation of oxygen. So this hemoglobin binds with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. You can write in the equation hemoglobin, Hb means hemoglobin. Hemoglobin binds with oxygen to form HbO2. HbO2 means oxyhemoglobin. So oxygen binds with hemoglobin to form oxyhemoglobin. So this reaction takes place in the lungs region. Okay, so in the lungs region, oxyhemoglobin is formed. So this oxyhemoglobin is transported to the tissues. In the tissue region, again this HbO2, this oxyhemoglobin diffuse into the or dissociated, oxyhemoglobin dissociated, hemoglobin plus oxygen. So this oxygen released into the tissue. So here this hemoglobin can bind with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. Next here we will learn about hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is in the hemoglobin two parts are present. So they are heme plus globin. Heme plus globin. Globin is a protein part. It's a protein. Globin is a protein. Heme is the prosthetic group. Prosthetic group means non-protein part. Non-protein part, protein part. These two are present in the hemoglobin. So here heme is also called prosthetic group. In the heme, 4 ferrous ions or iron ions are present in the heme. 4 ferrous ions are present. So this F2 Fe plus 2. So these ferrous ions can bind with the oxygen. So one hemoglobin can bind with 4 oxygen molecules. One hemoglobin can bind with 4 oxygen molecules. Here one ferrous binds with 1 oxygen. So for example here in hemoglobin 4 ferrous Fe plus 2. So 4 ferrous ferrous molecules are there. So each ferrous molecule binds with oxygen. So each one hemoglobin can bind with 4 oxygen. Next, 1 gram of hemoglobin can carry the 1.34 ml of oxygen. 1 gram of hemoglobin can carry the 1.3 ml of oxygen. Next, 100 ml of blood carry the 5 ml of oxygen. So 1 hemoglobin carry 4 oxygen molecules. 1 gram of hemoglobin carry 1.3 ml of oxygen. Next, 100 ml of blood, total 100 ml of blood can carry the 5 ml of oxygen. Okay. So this is about structure of hemoglobin. So this hemoglobin binds with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin in the lungs region. So in the lungs region, what will happen? The partial pressure of oxygen is high in the lungs. So in the lungs region, this partial pressure of oxygen, it promotes the formation of oxyhemoglobin. So in the lungs region, more amount of oxyhemoglobin is formed. So Hb plus Hb reacted with O2 to form HbO2 in lungs region. This reaction takes place in the lungs region because of the partial pressure of oxygen is high here. Next, whereas in tissue region, what will happen in tissue region? Partial pressure of oxygen is low. In tissue region, partial pressure of oxygen is low. So that promotes the dissociation of the hemoglobin, which means hemoglobin release the oxygen into the tissues. So as a result, that oxygen is utilized for the cells activity purpose. So okay, so this is about hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, RBC contains a respiratory pigment that is called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin binds with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. So next, hemoglobin has 2 parts. They are one heme and globin part. Heme is a prosthetic group, globin is a protein part. Heme is also called prosthetic or non-protein part. So in the heme region, 4 ferrous ions are present. Ferrous or iron ions are present. So each ferrous ion can bind with 1 oxygen molecule. So 1 hemoglobin molecule can bind with 4 oxygen molecule. So means 1 hemoglobin can carry 4 oxygen molecules. 1 gram of hemoglobin can carry the 1.3 ml of oxygen. 100 ml of blood carry the 5 ml of oxygen. Next, in the lungs region, what will happen in the lungs region? The partial pressure of oxygen is high. So this partial pressure of oxygen helps to the binding of the hemoglobin with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. Next, whereas in tissue region partial pressure of oxygen is low. So that's why that oxyhemoglobin, it dissociates, it releases the oxygen into the tissues. So in this way, oxygen is transported to the tissues. Oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. So oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve means it's a graphical representation. So this graph explains the relation between percentage of saturation of hemoglobin and partial pressure of oxygen. So here this graph explains the relation between percentage of saturation of hemoglobin. Percentage of saturation of hemoglobin, which means saturation means hemoglobin can binds with oxygen. So means how many oxygen molecules can binds with hemoglobin. So that is called saturation. For example, hemoglobin, it can carry the how many oxygen molecules? 4 oxygen molecules. It can carry the 4 oxygen molecules, means it can binds with 4 oxygen molecules. But if it can binds with only 1 oxygen, that is called 25% of saturation. If it is binds with 2 oxygen molecules, that is called 50% of saturation. If it is binds with 3 oxygen molecules, that is called 75% of saturation. If it is binds with 4 oxygen molecules, that is called 100% of saturation. So this is the meaning of saturation. Saturation means this hemoglobin binds with how many oxygen molecules. So that is called saturation. So this graph here, this is a graph. So this graph explains the relation between hemoglobin saturation or saturation of hemoglobin and the partial pressure of oxygen. So in the here the x axis, this is the x axis, y axis. In the x axis we have taken partial pressure of oxygen in the mmHg. In the x axis we have taken partial pressure of oxygen 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 up to 100. So these are values of partial pressure of oxygen. Next, in the y axis we have taken the percentage of hemoglobin saturation, 10%, 20%, 30%, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100%. So this percentage we have taken on the y axis. So these are explain the saturation capacity. Here these values we can get by these values we can get a sigmoid shaped or S-shaped graph. This graph is sigmoid graph or S-shaped graph. S-shaped graph. So by these values we can get the S-shaped graph or sigmoid graph. So this graph explains the relation between partial pressure of oxygen and saturation capacity. For example, this partial pressure of oxygen in the 20 mmHg of partial pressure of oxygen, it is how much is saturated? 30 to 35%. Next, in the 40 mmHg, in the partial pressure of 40 mmHg, it is increased. So how much? 75% of saturation. The hemoglobin can saturated 75%. Here in 20 pressure of oxygen is when it is 20, it saturated 35 or 25%. Here we can write 25 and take the 25%. Okay. Next, at the 40, just here only 20 is difference. The partial pressure of oxygen is reached to 40. So whenever it reaches to 40, the saturation capacity is increased. This much of increase takes place. So as a result, it has 75% of saturation. Next, when the partial pressure is reached up to 100 or 90 above, 97, 90 above. So that it has 100% of saturation. 100 means 97% of saturation, because 3% of oxygen can carry by the dissolved state. So that's why we are saying 97% saturation takes place in the 100% of partial pressure of oxygen. So which means we can get a sigmoid shaped curve. So this curve explains the relation between hemoglobin saturation and partial pressure of saturation.